Chuck will be speaking about this time of his period of service. After his military service, Chuck graduated from BSU and worked for the U.S. Forest Service as a special agent criminal investigator and for Adair County as deputy court marshal. So please welcome Chuck.
Good morning. I guess I didn't realize we were going to do the introduction. Being up here as a criminal investigator, people may not appreciate that. Just a brief history of Korea. I'm sure most of you probably remember something about it, but it was also known as the Forgotten War, so a lot of information isn't out there. It actually started June 25th of 1950, when an estimation, depending on what you read, between 75,000 and over 100,000 North Korean troops invaded South Korea. Over the next, they started having meetings to attempt to create some kind of an armistice, and over a period of about 2 years and 1,036 meetings, they finally signed an armistice between the United Nations and North Korea on July 27th, 1953. I got to Korea July 26, 1963, so I was 10 years after signing the armistice. There were several, obviously, problems getting that armistice signed. Three of the major issues were the POWs, both sides had numerous POWs, and one of the things that probably helped the armistice to be signed when it was, the Red Cross in Geneva encouraged both the North Koreans and the United Nations to put together what was termed opposition. Get my tongue untumbled here. Little Switch, which was the Korean prisoner of war trade. And that happened in April of 1953. And there were 605 United Nations troops returned south and about 6,030 North Korean and Chinese POWs sent north. One of the things that happened from that created more interest in the signing of the armistice was that particularly the North Korean prisoners of war from the United Nations side were in terrible shape. They hadn't been fed, they were very thin, very skinny, and the big thing was their injuries had not been treated, most of them. That encouraged them to work a little more on the armistice. As you can see on the map up here, the DMZ was another part of the armistice. It's 153 miles long, 2.4 miles across, and the military demarcation line, the actual line between North and South Korea, goes right down the DMZ. It was pretty well in place before the armistice was signed. Reading what I've read, one of the reasons that there was so many delays in getting the armistice signed was that the North Koreans were still completing a number of fortifications just north of the DMZ. The third important part of the armistice was there was supposed to be an agreement between both sides that there would be a limit on the number of troops on each side, the number of aircraft, the number of weapons of any kind. And in order to ensure that that happened, a group called the Neutral Nations Supervisory Commission was stationed at Panmunjom, right there. That's where I was stationed also. But the Neutral Nations Supervisory Commission was, their role was to inspect and ensure that the conditions of the armistice were being followed. The representatives from the United Nations side was Switzerland and Sweden. The representatives for the North Korean side was Czechoslovakia and Poland. The thing that happened there again was suddenly the North Koreans started restricting access to areas for the Swiss and Swedes to inspect. And so by the time I got there in '63, basically the only function of the Neutral Nations Supervisory Commission is that if hostilities broke out again, they were to report to the United Nations and everything, going, who started it? Well, you've got two countries on each side. What's going to happen? They're both going to point to the other side. As I said, I got to Korea July 26th of '63, and one of my first introductions to Korea was, it's called Freedom Bridge. It crosses the Imjim River. We were transported, there was actually 20 of us from my military police company were transported up to Panmunjom, and when we got there, I think that's probably when reality kind of set in, because when we got to this bridge, which to get on up to Panmunjom, you had to cross the Imjim River, every vehicle at the time that I was going across was escorted by a Jeep-mounted 30 caliber machine gun in front of it and a Jeep-mounted 50 caliber machine gun behind it, because one of the first nights I was in Korea, the North Koreans had come south just outside Panmunjom and shot up a patrol unit from the 9th Cavalry Recon Battalion, 1st Cavalry Division, killed a couple GIs, and this is during the time that the M14 rifle was being distributed to combat units. They took 2 of the M14s and continued on back to North Korea. The rest of the North Korean patrol went south with the, we were told the mission was to go to Seoul and assassinate President Park Chung-hee. And there was live fire skirmishes for the period of about 2.5 weeks. When you got to Panmunjom, the first briefing that they gave us after the introduction here at the bridge was, you need to understand, they had us giving us an initial briefing, you need to understand that our compound is in the middle of the valley that's been used by every conquering army of the Korean Peninsula in recorded history. If North Korea comes south, we are 98% casualties. I wasn't smart enough then, and I'm not sure I am now, to keep my mouth shut. My first question was, well, then what's the 2%? I want to be one of them. There was a staff car driver unit, and they said statistically 2% of the staff per day was off post, and they may survive. Our compound was a very small compound, a total of 6 officers, 130 enlisted men, and about 35, they were called Katusas, Koreans assigned to the United States Army. This is the greeting committee at our main gate. A couple of the MPs and a couple of the Katusas. The joint security area is staffed 24/7s by both North Korea and the United Nations at that time. The joint security area is a site about 800 meters in diameter, half of it which is in North Korea, the other half in South Korea. On all of the posts, like I say, 24/7, there's usually 2 GIs, and at the North Korean post, there's a couple North Koreans. This is a current picture of the site at Panmunjom. The blue buildings are the ones that were there when I was there. The building behind is a building that the North Koreans assembled. So we are on the south side, looking at the, looking north, and the difference that I can tell you from what was like when I was there, you can see the sidewalk that goes across right there. That marks the military demarcation line, and they are not allowed at this time. They were not allowed when these pictures were taken for people from south to go into North Korea and vice versa. The buildings were maintained by the United Nations, so they're lovely United Nations blue. This is a picture from North Korea looking south, back basically at the very same meeting buildings and the structure that the United Nations put up for the staff and for the visitor center for visitors that are coming up to Panmunjom. It was quite a visitor place. The year I was there, we put through 26,000 tourists. A lot of impact on our little bitty compound. One of the big ones was it quite often created the need for an additional 400 meals a day for the visitors that came. There is a couple things that I think are pretty interesting in this picture. Typically, we had pretty free reign of the area itself. The North Koreans paid very close attention to their people because there was a possibility for them to defect. And I noticed in this picture, in almost every place, well, I did it, didn't I? In almost every place, there is at least 2 North Koreans standing together. And we were told that was so that none of them decided to walk away. This is typically one of the meetings that was held in North Korea, or held at the Joint Security Area. North Korea side is on the right. The United Nations side on the left. There's, I think, a couple of rather interesting things about this picture. A story I have to tell, the United Nations flag right here on the table right in front, it created quite a problem for a while. It started out, the United Nations people brought in a little flag. At the time all this happened in the Korean culture, if you were taller than them, you were superior to them. So the North Koreans brought in a flag that was a little taller. So the United Nations brought one in that's a little taller. The North Koreans brought one in that's a little taller. finally they wouldn't fit on the tables anymore, so they started putting flags on the ground. The last time the North Koreans brought in a flag, they actually poked a hole in the ceiling of the building because it was too tall to stand up, and that hole was still there when I got there in '63. The other thing, like I say, with their height ideas, typically what happened, they would send somebody into the meeting room and they would turn down all of the chairs on the United Nations side so everybody was sitting as low as they could, and they would twist their chairs up. So if you notice here, even though the Korean people were, most of them pretty small, he's sitting taller than the United Nations group over there, again, to show superiority. The picture, or the windows in the background, the meeting room has windows full length so that our visitors could come and look through the windows. This was a picture of a meeting that took place when I was there. Basically, same things. The North Korean flag is a little taller than the United Nations flag. Their officer is a little taller than the other one. The first assignment in the Joint Security Area was always a rather interesting thing to take place. First time we went into the Joint Security Area itself, which was about 3 miles from our compound, when you got out of the vehicle, the first thing that you noted was out of the North Korean guard post, there would be a camera lens coming out. The entire time that you were in the Joint Security Area, it was usual that you would see North Koreans following you with binoculars to see what you were doing. One of the things that created quite a lot of concern and created some problems, you're in the middle of a war zone anyway, but the North Koreans on a regular basis would do what we call the isolation game. You'd be standing on a post someplace, and all of a sudden you look down and there would be 8 or 10 Koreans, North Koreans, moving up to you like this to see how close they could get, to see what your space was and everything. The commander of our unit said when you experience the isolation game, you dang well better break the circle and knock someone on their butt when you do it. When it happened to me the first time, I played football, I threw a forearm shiver, knocked a guy down. I was never bothered by the isolation game again. There was other guys that I know of that would excuse me, and work their way through, and they continued to be harassed by the Koreans with the isolation game. This is the interior of the meeting. We're looking from the north side to the south side. Again, the table right there in the fore part of the picture is where the military demarcation line goes. The reason I show this picture is the little booth back in the back left-hand corner. We referred to that as Mr. Kim's workshop. Mr. Kim was a translator. The meetings that were held there were held at 4 different levels. The commanding general's level, the secretary's level, the joint security officer's level, and the daily level of meetings that they had there. The first 2 meeting levels were held in 3 languages: English, Korean, and Chinese. When whoever was speaking, if it was the United Nations speaking, they first spoke in English, then Chinese, then Korean. If the North Koreans were speaking, they would speak in Korean, Chinese, and then English, because Korean was the last language used when they received the discussion or the information from the meeting. When their interpreter finally got it, it would always take them quite a bit of time to not only translate what was said, but to determine their response. Whereas Mr. Kim in the United Nations side, all of the people on the United Nations crew had a earpiece and a receiver. Mr. Kim would translate it as soon as it was said in Korean. So by the time they spoke Korean, Chinese, when they spoke Korean, Chinese, and English, they were all ready to respond to the whatever comments they made. While I was there, besides the security thing that we did, I also, for some reason or another, got to escort a lot of officers into those meetings. The military police unit there at Panmunjom was, I think, hand-selected pretty well. They averaged almost 6'2". I was one of the shortest the whole time I was there. And I think partly because of that, I was used as an escort. But there was 4 situations that I was escorting officers into the meetings that my folks actually observed me on national TV. These were top-level meetings. One of them was a helicopter pilot's replacement had come to Korea, and the pilot that was being replaced decided to take the new pilot on a tour to show him about where they were, and for some reason or another, they happened to wander across the DMZ and get shot down in North Korea. We had meetings to retrieve those 2 officers. There was also a defector who, at least the information we got over, was a North Korean agent who had been working in South Korea, who was trying to go back to North Korea, and because of the defection, they had quite a meeting on it. And one of the things that was interesting in that, a lot of the people that went to North Korea, POWs, in order not to show any support or any, support to the South Side, they would remove all of their clothing before they went to North Korea. And this defector in the meeting room took off all of his clothes when he went to North Korea. There was another South Korean pilot that took a F-86 Super jet, took off from Seoul, and he tried to defect to North Korea. The people that were on duty happened to see him get shot down right up by Pyongyang, and we had a meeting to get him back. And then the 4th meeting that I escorted officers was they actually had a live firefight on the MDL in the middle of the DMZ, and they had quite a meeting about how they were going to resolve that. As I said, a major impact to us as security guys there, we hosted 26,000 visitors the year that I was there. First thing that happened to the visitors, they showed up in buses. well, if I can get the photo to change. The first thing that happened to them, they were unloaded off the buses and taken to a briefing area and given the rules of the road for that particular day or that particular site. The interesting thing that was always interesting to me was anytime we had a military unit show up, we doubled the amount of escorts there because it was not unusual to have a little conflict when some of our American GIs made contact or at least got fairly close to a North Korean for the first time. And so we always had double the escorts for those. So they were given a briefing, each one of them. One of the requirements of the site was everybody had to be issued a badge to allow them in the joint security area. This briefing took place at our compound outside the DMZ. They were then generally allowed to take a little break because they'd probably been on a bus for a while, loaded on a bus, and there was an escort on every bus to continue the security briefing. And the big thing was, don't talk, don't talk, don't talk. When they got to the joint security area itself, they unloaded them off the bus, and we gave them another briefing. Again, don't talk, don't talk, don't talk. This, going back. This is a picture of some of our visitors looking through the windows of the meeting room, observing the meetings that were taking place. They were broadcast over the area, but they also could stand up and look down through the windows to see what was going on in the meeting room. As I said at that time, the entire joint security area was open to access, so you didn't, they could be in North Korea looking in at the meeting without any problem. After they came back from their visit to Panmunjom itself, when they got back to our compound, that's when they were released and generally went up, and like I said, typically 400 additional meals at our mess hall anytime we had visitors. This is called the Bridge of No Return. This is the site where all of the prisoner repatriations took place. The site on the north side over there is staffed by a North Korean group. We never knew for sure how many. There was 2 of us in the guardhouse here. It was called the loneliest guard post in the world. The area is an uncleared minefield. To get out to this post, you have to pass at least 2 occupied North Korean guard posts. So if you decided to leave there, you had to go past the North Koreans to get there. So you were kind of hung out there. While I was there, one of the incidents that took place just before I got there, a couple of guys were in the guard post. A North Korean vehicle came south, and of course their responsibility was to observe and check that vehicle. They didn't stop, they just went by. No one looked out the window. The North Koreans turned around at the next intersection, the next guard post, went back the other direction, back towards the post there that you can see on the north side. No one looked out of the window. They came by the 3rd time, and this time just happened to lob a hand grenade through the window of the guardhouse. Both of the MPs that were in the guardhouse, when they heard the glass break, dove for the door, and they dove far enough behind, over the hill there, that They were skinned up a little bit, but they both survived. One of the things we were told in part of our briefing, several years before I was there was actually two military policemen were actually taken hostage from that guard post and transported back north. A major portion of course, the agreement and everything was the prisoner repatriation. As I said, Operation Little Switch was kind of the beginning of it and helped things going. April through November of '53, we had Operation Big Switch. In Big Switch, 13,444 United Nations troops were returned south. Quite a number, except that there were 89,493 North Korean and Chinese prisoners released back to the north. One of the major discussions in the agreement, the North Koreans insisted that all prisoners of war were required to return to their country. United Nations said, well, if there's some that don't want to return, they can stay. North Koreans wouldn't accept that. When it finally happened, and they finally, well, evidently what happened is Russia took a lead from the United Nations command, and there was enough pressure from the United Nations to get them to sign the armistice. When the Operation Big Switch took place, 22,000 North Koreans refused to return back to North Korea. They were turned loose in South Korea, and some of them went to Formosa, some of them went to other countries. We did have some that refused repatriation to the south also. There was 21 American soldiers that refused repatriation. They have all left China or died by now. There's one British soldier, and there was 125 South Korean soldiers that refused repatriation. One of the things, because of the Korean War, there's still a lot of soldiers on both sides that have family on both sides. It was interesting to me, one of the things that I always valued over there is I got to work with troops from 12 countries that participated in the Korean conflict. There was actually 17 countries that had troops there that fought in the conflict. I got to work with 12 of them, but we had a lot of unusual things, and I probably should have brought this up when I was talking about, well, there's the North Korean guard post that you could always see the camera coming out. This is one I intended to use. This is one that is always very special to me. The USO Miss America pageant put together a show for the troops in Korea. When they showed up at Panmunjom, somehow or another, the post commander found a military policeman from each of the states that the Miss America candidates were from. There was only about 10 of them. I guess fortunately for me, Miss Idaho 1962, Miss Irene Ammons was on the tour, and my assignment for that day was to escort Miss Idaho 1962 for the day. They did their show. We took them up to Panmunjom to the joint security area, gave them a view of that up there, came back, and of course, with all these beautiful ladies, we had to have dinner with the officers, but it always tickled me, what did they have at dinner, but they served us fried chicken. everybody is sitting there looking at their plates of fried chicken, and one of the little Miss America candidates, I think she was from Mississippi, looked up and down the table. She said, "I don't know about you all, but when we all have fried chicken at our house, we eat it with our fingers." And she reached down to pick up her chicken, and it was like somebody flipped a switch. Everybody reached down and picked up their chicken. While I was there also going through this, at the meetings, there was always an honor guard. I got to work with the honor guard of the British. These were from Her Majesty's Royal Service in Hong Kong. Turkish, an Ethiopian honor guard. For those of you, all of you that have been in the service, if you want to challenge marching, you march with the British one time, the Ethiopians the next time, the Turkish the next time, and the Thailanders the next time. It's always a challenge. But they were great guys to work with. The one thing that probably concerns me as much about, well, isn't a concern, because I have a concern about North Korea. One of the things that I keep thinking about is, as of today, as of this current time, there are still 7,700 MIAs in Korea. It's expected most of them are in North Korea, and they're working hard when they get remnants to identify them, but there are still 7,700 MIAs. There's been a lot of activity since I left over there. To me, it was a fantastic assignment, but I thought just to be real quick, I give a couple things since I left over there. Of course, 1968 was the Pueblo incidents, where North Korea captured the USS Pueblo, and those troops spent 11 months in North Korean custody, and they were the last people to come back across the Bridge of No Return in December of 1968. There was also the tunnels that have been found in 1974, 75, 78, and 90, and I think there's been some additional ones from then. The axe murder in 1976, where a United Nations crew was trying to trim the trees along the roads going up to the loneliest post in the world and everything, and they were attacked by the North Koreans, and the commander was axed to death. Because of that, there was a pretty heated meeting between North and South, and the North Koreans in 72 hours built a new road and a new bridge across it isn't really a year-round river. It dries up most of the time. But so that bridge, they were the last ones to use the Bridge of No Return to return. I guess one of the other things that I thought was interesting is in 1991, the United Nations withdrew participating in the Korean conflict. So now everything there is basically between North Korea and South Korea. South Korea never signed the armistice. The President, Syngman Rhee, insisted that the United Nations and the Koreans should push all the way to the Chinese border and make sure that the entire Korean peninsula was free. And of course, that's never happened. But the North Koreans and the South Koreans are now the conflict between those two. Has anybody got any questions I can answer? Anything? There is one thing I was going to mention. Yes, sir.
Ever get the Pueblo back? We never got it back.
As far as I know, the Pueblo is still there. We did get the crew back, but we have not got the Pueblo back, to the best of my knowledge. The other thing I was going to mention real quickly that I didn't mention when I showed pictures of the bridge is when the North Koreans would be returned in order to show that they had, just like the defectors, show that they had no strong feelings towards South Korea or anything, or any contact with them. They would, as they were getting close to the bridge of no return, they would start stripping off clothes. And I've actually got pictures of truckloads of North Korean POWs being returned, and there's clothes and boots going off both sides of the truck. The road was littered, and the bridge on both sides of the bridge was littered with clothing and shoes that were deposited by the North Koreans. And even though I got there 10 years after the armistice was signed, there were still remnants of that clothing on both sides of the bridge on the ground. Yes, question?
So you're aware, the Pueblo was turned into a museum by the North Koreans.
Okay.
So it is a military museum honoring their military.
Everybody hear that? The Pueblo is a museum, a North Korean museum.
The captain of the Pueblo was Lloyd Booker,
Yes.
and he grew up in the children's home on Warm Springs Avenue in Boise. And he was a Boisean. And
That's one reason I enjoy coming to places like this. You learn new stuff every time.
And ironic and not so funny thing, he came back here in 1976 during the bicentennial, and they floated down the river of no return, the salmon, and he sank the raft.
Any other questions? Hope you enjoyed. Thank you very much. Got a question over here.
Any idea what the motives were with the Americans that decided to stay in North Korea? Likely they didn't have family, right? So.
I think you'd have to ask them. No, I have no idea. It evidently was an adventure. I think I read that most of them married somebody in North Korea, but I have no idea what their thing was. Same way with, 21 Americans and 1 British soldier. Why did they decide to stay north?
I have a question here. The demarcation line, 38th parallel, where was it before the war began? Was it the same place?
It moved back and forth up and down the Korean peninsula. It was actually pretty much in place the last year and a half before the armistice was signed, because like I said, one of the things that, according to the United Nations, one of the things that was happening was China had a couple 100,000 troops fortifying the area just north of the DMZ to make sure that the United Nations didn't push north to the Chinese border. I think the one figure I heard was like 330,000 troops in the 153 miles across there. But it was pretty much in place about halfway through their discussion, their 2-year discussion of the 1,034 meetings, which another thing I thought was interesting about those meetings, they said some of them lasted 9 hours and some of them were as long as 1 minute. People got there, the meeting was over. No more questions? No more questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chuck. That was very interesting. We'd like you to have this Warhawk coin.
Thank you, thank you.
Thank you, sir. And today is June 6th, the anniversary of the Normandy invasion. So Lou has set up a special display over by the door there. Please take a look at it before you leave. Very interesting.